Philosophers talk to our times towards an ethnography of the poisoning mind. One of the effects of the world, of the particular fork we are in, is that we bridge the unpleasantness of the two-pronged fork with myths of identity that actually it enables. But let me explain, I suppose. I'm taking it as a self-evident truth that there are two interlinked skewers of reality. The first is the myth of the free market. Now, the free market is one of those oxymoronic statements. It was actually created because it ran two things that were totally self-contradictory together. That was its power, something we tend to forget, really. So being free, that was freedom. That was freedom of press, freedom to think, freedom to express your opinions, etc. And the markets were normally rigged. Or, if not rigged, they were never kind of just debating prices. They were far more complicated a sequence of social interactions, where you bought from your neighbours, where you exchanged communications. The market was, and here in rural France still is, the major social event of the week. And in order to get the idea of the free market going, you ran those two ideas together. Now, you could say they're not contradictory. Well, maybe. But one of the things that was always happening in a French market, for instance, is all the gossip spreads, all the knowledge. And yes, you buy things, and yes, they vary their prices to how well they like you and how much they've got and all the rest of it. But their aim is never just to make a profit. Their aim is to be caught up within a wider social set of exchanges. So the notion of profit is well, I better put a caveat on it. They're making a Bourdieu type profit, social profit, rather than actual financial gain. And freedom, well, it was just a different concept. It was a different thing that tended to put people in isolation. And of course, the effect of running those two concepts together is to create the idea of a market where everybody has to behave as an isolated individual, which is why I say it's an oxymoronic statement. Because in markets, people never worked, and I don't think probably ever do work as individuals. Rather, they're always after that little bit of knowledge, that little bit of insider trading, that little bit of gossip that gives them the edge. And of course, we live in a system where the very wealthy, the Epstein classes, the Trump classes, deliberately rig the market so that they know things that others don't in order to make money and invent phony currencies to do it. All that jazz. That's one element of the prong. And of course, the other element that came along at the same time as the sacrificing of the economy in the name of oil to the free market was the notion it was technology. And technology has grown the way it has grown because of the free market. Now, that is an deliberately ambivalent statement. Would it have grown so spectacularly without the free market? I don't know. Nobody knows. What other world could you have had within it? Well, you could have had a Keynesian world where a technological expanse was planned from, or at least not planned, it was financed from the government. And the government was caught up in devising technological breakthroughs and orchestrating their implication. Would it have worked? Probably not. If I'm honest with you, my suspicion is that governments move rather slowly and bureaucrats even slower. And so you would have been left in a state where the government was always implementing the technologies of yesteryear. But that kind of if-then speculation is moribund, really. But the point is that the two together, these two prongs, make a skewer us all. We all get defined in a certain place in the economy, and it's very hard to get yourself out of that place now. The idea that there's much social freedom, there's a bit. But education isn't going to save you. It's no longer the route to wealth. More likely, it is being born of rich parents that will define where you are in the social order once again. And anyway, because the wealthy now are excessively wealthy, and those who owned their money and got their properties 40 years ago are now leagues of wealth above those who didn't. The entire system is ossifying into some kind of neo-caste system. More than, I think, feudalism. It's caste, where everything has to owe, where you always have to owe to the top for the right to exist, the right to somehow be morally pure. In such a system is then profoundly uncomfortable. All the more so as it is sold to us as a system of freedom and as the only plausible system. And certainly it is the only system that technology seems to have been able to create. As I said, if at the beginning technology and the free market had not coalesced in the same moment, so the BBC Micro and Thatcherism are both symbols of the early 80s. Who knows? I don't know. I've often speculated, because why not? But this far down the road, I find such speculation tired and old. So, we are in a world then where our social positions have become set near in stone and difficult to negotiate, and yet seem to be self-evident in this technological utopia that we appear to have stumbled upon. So what can we do? Well, that's when you follow, of course, that old most Marxist of dictums. You take the opiate. You see, technology, of course, always offers opiates. It has, in its current incarnation, created endless new ways to recreate who and what your identity is, so that you can now be the person you fantasize you always were, at least electronically. You can create avatars of yourself, or whatever you want to call them, and live in that imaginary universe, that gamed universe, that sexually perverse universe, that whatever boats you float. And that, of course, changes how we understand our very notion of identity, because it becomes rooted, as I've said before, no longer in flesh and blood, but in flying pixels and in dreams. And that's very firmly on one side. And on the other side, of course, information spreads across the line as we try to mitigate a bit our pain. The pain, I mean, of a social system that is severely dysfunctional and that absolutely keeps the majority of people, if not in poverty, because poverty is no fun, but in near poverty, just above the poverty line, just enough to keep them anxious, just enough to make them worry about their day-to-day existence so that they don't have time to think about revolution. But they do, of course, have time to speculate about the simple move that would change. You see, the real problem with any major revolution, it's why left-wing parties always veer radically to the right when they get into government, whatever their great oratory, is that actually doing things in government either requires you using the existing social system or dismantling it piece by piece by piece. And it is much easier to dismantle it if you're on the right and don't look to replace it with anything. The problem with the left is that we actually want to replace it with a functioning system, and that's rather hard, unless you're really going to just have a revolution and destroy the entire system and start again, and then it might just be impossible. So my point is that there is no simple solution on the left. No straightforward, we can just knock down this and then everything will be all right. But if you're caught in a world where you are trying to look to politics to take an opiate in order to mitigate your day-to-day existence, the left has very little to say. But the politics of identity, that's got a huge amount to say, and can say a huge amount to everybody very, very quickly. As you get your designer opiate to take, whether you just simply blame the billionaires, which isn't such a very bad idea, but simply removing them wouldn't stop the problem. That's my real point. We can blame them all we like, but that's culture war stuff. It's fine. It's an identity. It's a badge of identity, a badge of the world would be different, would have been different, could have been different, without really going through how that difference works. Or, of course, you can blame the poor, you can blame the migrants, you can blame globalization, which, of course, is caught up with it because both prongs that we're stuck upon are prongs of globalization. I mean, mass computerization and the free market are both the prongs of globalization. So you can blame it. You can blame it for the failure of your country, for the failure of your leaders. You can blame it for your poverty if you must. And of course people do, confusing the migration of money for the migration of people. Why? Because the migration of money implies all kinds of uncomfortable questions about which would lead you to question the overall social order. A social order that in the end you're going to have to try to survive within. So you get caught up then in endless difficult questions, and computers are, well, the current state of technology is ace at allowing us to create new opiates for ourselves. New ways we can mitigate our own pain, new people to blame, new thoughts that we can share, and in the ricocheting thoughts feel that we're making them true. Well, why not? There's not much else to do, is there? As the world begins to burn. And it ends up as very cynical. And I might be coming across as terribly cynical today. But that's actually because this entire topic of identity makes me cynical. The entire topic that where we have become, just when we need to be doing really serious, hard work, thinking about the nature of the kind of states that will survive the coming difficulties. We've become rather obsessed with problems of identity, with problems of what pronoun to use or not use, with problems of migration, problems of culture, with all that fritty, frothy nation stuff that is so glimmery and glamoury and solves not an iota the problem that we are in, but rather makes the waltz into extinction feel more glamorous. So what can you do? Well, I know what I did, obviously. I had the money and I don't deny it. I used it to escape. But if you can't escape, then you'll have to start to question from within, because you've got no other solution in the end. We actually have to question the state and the way we do it, and take the consequence of whatever revolution is possible to change it, because what is certain is the current system ain't going to be able to survive what it's about to do.